Next on our schedule is the second keynote for today. I'm happy to welcome our honored out-of-town guest, Father Robert Sirico. Father Sirico is the president and co-founder of the Acton Institute and pastor at Sacred Heart of Jesus Parish and Academy in Grand Rapids, Michigan. A regular writer and commentator on religious, political, economic, and social issues, Father Sirico's contributions have been carried by the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, the Washington Times, CNN, ABC, CBS, NPR, and the BBC, among others. You may have seen his very fine piece on Michael Novak in the Wall Street Journal just last Friday. In his recent book, Defending the Free Market, The Moral Case for a Free Economy, Father Sirico shows how a free economy is not only the best way to meet society's material needs, but also the surest protection of human dignity against government encroachment. Welcome, Father Sirico.
I feel very much at home here. This is my alma mater. And I darkened the halls of some of these buildings, had my share of arguments and with some of the professors, enjoyed the presence of good comrades and friends on this campus. And to be here today on this occasion, especially in the presence of Michael's family, makes me very much feel at home here. Those years that I spent at CUA, here at CUA, were meaningful to me not just because of the formation, some of the great professors that I had, Avery Dulles, Monsignor John Tracy Ellis, engaged in intense but convivial debate with Charles Curran on this campus, and many, many times had Michael visit here or at the Paulist House. I'm a recovering Paulist. And I also reflect on the influence, of course, that he had, but my job is a lot easier. A lot of the other participants have done the heavy lifting, the intellectual heavy lifting. I've been commissioned today to talk in reminiscences of Michael and what they bring to my mind as to his influence and his legacy. And I met Michael because I wrote, before I came to CUA, before I began my theological studies, and asked if we could meet and talk, because I had undergone my own transition from the left, and realized that there was something in his writing. The first Catholic theologian that I had read who had read Hayek, and wanted to engage this mind and thought that I had a lot to learn from him. And so we did. In fact, the book, Jay, I don't know where is Jay's brightly colored head? There it is. Jay, if Will It Liberate did nothing more than affect your transition, then it was well worth it. I had read Michael's article, I think it was in the Times magazine supplement, on liberation theology, and I said to him, I'm constantly pelted in all of my theology courses. Every course has a section, and what does liberation theology say about this? Whether it was Christology or Eucharist or pastoral practice or whatever it was always liberation theology. I said, Michael, you have to write a book on this subject. There is no book on this subject. You need to do this. And he said, well, that's a good idea. Well, what should we do? And I was a Paulist, and that summer I was assigned to work at Paulist Press. And I submitted the New York Times magazine piece to the editors there and said, Michael Novak's willing to do a whole book on this subject. And surprise, surprise, Paulist Press was willing to do it. And they did it. And some of the things I want to say to you today are not things that are in the public domain, that are things that just happened. And in fact, this whole conference is hitting me in an unusual way because I kind of lived this stuff. I just took it moment by moment. And as I sit back now and see what I was in the middle of, the people I was in the middle of, the events that were going on at the time, the intellectual trends that were happening, Michael's involvement with the lay letter on the economy and the letter on nuclear disarmament, the whole movement of liberation theology, all of these things and these people really struck me. So I spent the better part of a year editing the book, and then when it came out, publicizing it. In fact, in my inscription, I have his book on my shelf with all my rare collection of books and first editions and everything. And he says to Robert, the grand impresario, who called editors and bothered people to review this book. What people don't know is that at Paulist Press, I'm really probably speaking out of line here, but I'm going to do it anyway. We received a letter, actually it was the president then of Paulist Press, received a letter from the editor, I don't think it was the publisher, the editor of Maryknoll, Orbis Books. This is the great opposite of this was the publishing arm of liberation theology in the United States. They had done Gutierrez's book and a slew of other books. And it was the epitome of a kind of smug progressivism that Michael had to confront repeatedly in the period of his career that I came to know him in. And it just was this friend to friend, progressive publisher to progressive publisher. We're bewildered that you would publish this book that represents such regressionary tendencies. And it was just to put a whole blanket over the whole thing. And it was this kind of thing, because of course I immediately sent a copy to Michael. And it was this kind of thing, and I remember that particular reaction, but I remember that same kind of reaction over and over again when he was unjustly critiqued. When he was justly critiqued, when you'd have a good argument with him, like you had at the back porch, very often fueled by Manhattans. By the way, I mentioned the Manhattans at the end of my Wall Street Journal article. I received more emails in reference to those Manhattans than anything else I said in the whole article. It was 3 sentences, or three words. He was pained. And I think this reveals why he was so persuasive to so many of us. And someone remarked or looked upon it as his ability to enter into the mind of the other person. And sometimes when you're entering into the mind of your opponent and your opponent is mad, this pains you. And very often there was no mind to enter into. At least so much of the reaction to Michael didn't evidence. Not all of it. Some of it was good, and some of it we've engaged with him on, and others we leave, to unresolved debates. But it was his ability to enter into that debate and find a way to establish an agreement on some premises and then proceed from there to some kind of conclusion, some kind of mutuality. One of the things, and I've described this elsewhere, but I must describe a few because I didn't put it in the Wall Street Journal article, but it was what I call the Salon Novak. This was a series of dinners that were held periodically, and Richard and Jana were young people in and out during the cooking of various meals in the service. Young people in and out of various meals in the service. Young people in and out during the cooking of various meals in the service. Young people in and out during the cooking of various meals in the service. During the cooking of various meals in the service. During the cooking of various meals in the service. Young people in and out like Irving Kristol and B. Himmelfarb. I remember one evening standing back and watching Claire Booth Luce tilt swords with Jack Kemp and Bill Bennett on the question of virtue. Thrilled to receive a note from Claire Booth Luce, who was very dear to the Novak family, really to her death, and thanking me for the antipasto and the chicken cacciatore and asking for the recipe for it so that her housekeeper could make it. Charles Krathammer and Mary Ellen Bork, Charles Murray, and others. Can you imagine, here I'm a seminarian, talk about being intimidated and feeling awkward, not knowing what to say in that environment. And my price of admission is the antipasto. I knew if I could get somebody on the topic of food, I was safe, you know. But to listen to the debates, and not just the content of the debate, but how one exchanged opinions with others. The sitting back and listening to the contrary argument to your own, and then to respond to it in a way that was gracious and articulate and informed. This was as rich as my formation, especially my formation in the early 1980s on this campus. It was a real augmentation of my whole intellectual grounding in the faith and in what Bill Buckley would call the controversial arts, the ability to engage debates civilly. And what a sad reality it is today that when we see the public debate, that so much of that elegance and informed dissent is missing from it. I long for that to be revived. I think that's part of our obligation. The thing that always struck me was the personal nature of the reaction to Novak. Again, not everyone. I remember in talking with Charles Curran about Michael, it was a friendly disagreement, but Curran was unique among that group of people. One of the people that Michael Novak was close to before I knew him, and if I'm not mistaken, was the godfather for his child, was the theologian, Protestant theologian Robert McAfee Brown. And I had occasion to meet Professor Brown at a conference, and we were talking about something to do with the conference, and then I said, by the way, you know, I know that you know somebody I know, Michael Novak, and the convivial engagement stopped immediately as the blood drained from his face. And I only was left to wonder, what was this personal animus? Many in the National Catholic Reporter camp, or I think there was a series of articles, if I remember, it was in Commonweal, that were real attacks on Michael. And some, again, some good points. There were good things to read. But the animus was because they felt, as one of these folks said, he was a Judas. He was a rising star of our movement, and he pulled back from it. What he did was expose the flaws in his own thinking, and then bravely went forward to see what could be done about that, how one could think their way through it. And I think really in his gentility, he thought that people would accompany him in that dialogue. And when he did engage, and there were a number of good debates that he had with people, it was always unfailingly that spirit that exemplified itself. I'm always asked when people know that I knew Novak for, I counted it up, it's 33 years that we were friends. Michael called me friend too. He people ask about John Paul II and Michael's influence. Andreas has already alluded to that, but I remember once, and again, I want to put this on a very personal level. Once I was having an audience with St. John Paul II, and he said, "You're an American." He could tell my Italian accent isn't exactly perfect. And he said, I said, "Yes." I said, "I'm a friend of Michael Novak and Father Newhouse." He said, "Ah, Novak and Neuhaus. You tell them I said hello. You tell them that I said hello." And so it was personal. There was an influence. Do I think that the Pope read the spirit of democratic capitalism and cribbed lines from it and put it in Centesimus Annus? I don't think so. We came to understand a bit more of that process when Michael, myself, Newhouse, Weigel became friends with Rocco Buttiglione. Buttiglione at that time was a professor. In fact, we were at the first seminar that we had, the Tertio Millennio seminar, which took place the first year or two in Liechtenstein, in the Principality of Liechtenstein. And we got to know Buttiglione there. And it was Buttiglione who had worked with John Paul II on Laborum Exercens and other encyclicals, and then on Centesimus Annus. And Buttiglione, who was, very discreet in describing both his role and the sources, nonetheless did identify Michael and a number of other sources that were part of the broad panorama of the Pope's thinking at the time of making sense of the collapse of real socialism in Europe that did, in fact, influence the document. We have spoken a great deal about, and appropriately so, Michael's Catholicity. But that Catholicity also led him in a very natural direction of an openness to people outside of the church, in particular the Jewish people. Among those names, you notice, of the people who sat around the table, there were many Jews. And I used to worry, because the first night I was serving Charles Krauthammer prosciutto, or prosciutto is ham, or Gertrude Himmelfarb, or don't worry about it, give it here. This was Irving. Give it here, piling it on. But Michael's particular reverence for the Jewish people and his constant reference to these elder brothers of ours in the faith, and how that provides the foundation of who we are as a Christian and Catholic people. And then the whole movement, of course, Michael dwelt in ecumenical circles from the time of the council. But when the movement of evangelicalism, and then, of course, later on, evangelicals and Catholics together began to emerge, Michael was very much an ally in all of this, and a very good friend, and highly respected by our dear and late friend Chuck Colson. But more than that, even going beyond believers, Michael, as is evidenced in a number of his works and in his dialogue with Jana, all of the hard questions with regard to the existence of God, with regard to epistemology, his respect for and wanting to engage somebody like Christopher Hitchens. I think in one place he said he would like to have a few drinks with Christopher Hitchens. And I would love to have been making the Manhattans at that engagement. I don't know if it ever finally came about, because I was on my way working with the Acton Institute in my own pastoral work. I need to say that those seminars, what I'm calling the Salon Novak, really were a proto-Acton Institute. It was in watching that engagement and seeing the broad scope of the conversation that inspired me It was like living in a graduate seminar on top of the graduate school that I was in here at Catholic University that inspired me. And when we began the Acton Institute, the first mission statement would not be published until I faxed it on the new invention at the time, the fax machine. Faxed it to Michael and asked for his take on it. And I probably still, oh, that was that crinkly paper. It may have dissolved by now, but I had for many years the paper that came back with his notes on it. And take this out, and it's not Judeo-Christian, it's Jewish-Christian, and those kinds of little edits, those little tweaks that he did to help focus this whole thing. I am so honored by the very thought of hearing, to see the Novak laureates who are here today. And throughout the world, there are, I think it's 17 Novak Award laureates, and to think that you have 3 of them right here at Catholic University of America. And when I think of that, and when we sat down to develop what the Novak Award would be, it wasn't just an award to just praise somebody, but it was to continue an intellectual tradition. When I see their presence here at this university and can picture their presence in universities in Poland and in the Czech Republic and in Italy and in France and in other places, it really is affirming that what we began there was begun in earnest and is coming to fruition. To talk about Michael and leave Karen Laub hyphen, don't forget the hyphen, Novak out, that was her line. Don't forget the hyphen, put the hyphen in. She was very protective of her hyphen. And to leave her out is to not have a full vision of this man. His graciousness in the way he treated her, the artistry of this woman, her aesthetic zaniness was exciting and exhilarating to watch and engage. And not only did the Salon Novak go on, but I remember one time I said, Karen, can I bring over some of my seminarian brothers to just have an evening with you on aesthetics? And so we did. I brought guys over from Catholic University to the house, and we sat around, and she showed us slides and discussed with us her techniques and the themes. And I have to say that on my ordination, I was given an original Laub Novak piece of art that I have hanging up at the Acton Institute. I should also say that I commissioned a crucifixion. If those of you who have seen the crucifix, I think once we commissioned it, there were maybe 2 others made. It's this corpus of our Lord in bronze, and you can just see you know how she was fascinated with rib cages. Our Lord hanging on the cross in his agony, not dead. The Christ in agony on the cross. That is present in the Cathedral of Grand Rapids to this day. And so all of these things blending together. We've emphasized a lot, and of course it's my day job to emphasize a lot, the synthesis of economics and morality, which Michael contributed so definitely to. But his mind was so much broader than that. As a number of people have remarked, that was an element of a broader vision of who human beings were, the nature of the human person. And I have to say that I'm not here to canonize Michael. There are people here who could perform the role of devil's advocate in terms of his failings, his humanity, his fallen humanity, which he would be the first to concede. But let me make this observation. Novak was an intellectually restless soul. He's been compare today to Jacques Maritain, to St. Thomas Aquinas, to Tocqueville, and others. My comparison to him when I think of him is something like the doubting Thomas, because I saw repeatedly Michael Novak insisting on the evidence, wanting to probe, even if it meant probing the wounds of the Savior. And didn't he do that? Didn't he want to stick his finger in the wounds to see what is really here? Whether it was the open church, which had to be painful for a number of us to read, or whether it was the spirit of democratic capitalism. I know that he probed a few wounds in the layman's letter in response to the bishops on the economy, and in the full issue of National Review on nuclear disarmament. I know that he probed the wounds of a lot of people when he went over to Rome and made the rounds in Rome at the beginning of the Iraq War. He was willing always to probe the wounds. But what's interesting about St. Thomas, in the end, the scriptures don't tell us that once our Lord appeared to him, that he actually felt the need to probe the wounds anymore. He simply encountered Christ personally. I pray that Michael now encounters that risen Christ, and the fact that I have given up alcohol for Lent and cannot have a martini with his family today, I pray will be sufficient to complete whatever time he had left in purgatory, so that he might enjoy that full and warm embrace of the living Christ. Thank you very much. Oh, no question. Nobody's asked for the recipe for the martini.
Thank you.
You know, thank you, because I missed a page here. That's why we're so short. I did want to go there. There's a challenge before us today, and that's what I wanted to touch on. We have a pope who hasn't read Novak. It's kind of like a pharaoh who did not know Joseph. And that epitomizes the necessity of this ongoing work. Not only that, but if I can be even a little more frank, I'm from Brooklyn. You know, I only live in Grand Rapids, but it is sad to me that those who should be in this legacy promotion, that should be promoting fully these ideas, particularly with regard to the economy, that some of them have dropped off the wagon. Some of them, under the pressure of whatever the political environment is, or whatever the trends of the next generation are, have pulled back from this and have questioned the value of it. My fear for Novak's legacy will be, I suppose it's the fear that Hayek himself identified in his acceptance speech when he received the Nobel Prize for Economics. he said, and I don't remember the exact words of it, but it was something to this. He said, will it be necessary for us to go into a whole dark age again because having achieved a free society, we no longer understand its roots or its importance or its vitality? And that's what I fear. And the first sign of that will be when people look at Novak's work and say, well, what's so new about that? There's nothing, important about that. To do that is to not understand the context in which Michael Novak worked out those ideas. And the social pressure against his doing that, his legacy, his ideas, and the necessity to institutionalize those ideas and broaden the network of people who are engaging in those ideas, whether it be here at the Catholic University of America or at the Acton Institute and in other places, in econ departments and theology faculties and seminaries throughout the world. This becomes all the more urgent. And I think we need, if all we do today is tell a lot of nice stories and reminisce and make the intellectual distinctions and ponder their implications, that would have been a fun thing for a few weeks of duration. We need to commit ourselves anew to building the institutions and the intellectual framework that will resiliently defend the free society against its attackers. Because there will be people who will take liberty for granted. They will think that the fight is over. But as the founders of the United States pointed out, we need to fight for this over and over again. That for evil to triumph, it's only necessary the good people do nothing. And culturally, socially, academically, professionally, we hear the cues to keep quiet about this synthesis. We've heard the kind of, well, just hold back, we need to kind of get in line with where things are going. Michael's instinct, maybe even, I know to a lot of people, an irritating instinct, was to always be contrarian, to always think, it was like Thomas. Yeah, you're all excited about the resurrection. I want to see it. I want to know it. And I think we need to push this forward. We need to do it, however, with the same conviviality that Michael was able to do it with, the same sense of joy and winsomeness that he almost infallibly displayed. And so, thank you for that. And by the way, if you go on the Acton Institute website and look for the Novak Award, we received